Hi, everyone. My name is Kristina, and thank you so much for joining my session today. I am so excited to talk with you about the journey into cybersecurity and finding the area of this industry that you're the most passionate about. It is a very personal subject for me because I have been through this, and I know it's one that can cause a bit of anxiety. So I really hope our talk today makes you feel a little bit more, I guess, comfortable and understanding that it's not just you. So many of us have been through this process. So we're going to talk about some ways to find your passion, find the niche in this industry that has so many opportunities, and why it's completely okay if you've taken an indirect route to get to your ultimate career. As I said, my name is Kristina, and I'm a senior threat researcher in threat intelligence at Lookout. My job is essentially to monitor and track advanced persistent threats as they relate to nation-state actors or cyber criminal groups, to reverse engineer the malware that they often distribute and the infrastructure that they use to actually do that distributing, and then write technical reports for the customers that are with Lookout about what we've seen. So I want to start off by talking a little bit about how very common it is for those of us in cybersecurity to have taken a little while to find our way here. And I'm going to show you this timeline of my journey, not because it is particularly thrilling, but because it is very messy. And I did not end up where I am today by going the direct route. I actually almost didn't end up here multiple times. So I loved computers from a very young age, and my parents were very encouraging with my love of computers. I started learning to program when I was around 9 years old, so like 1999-ish. But despite this, I really wasn't directed towards engineering or computer science at all. In fact, I remember asking a guidance counselor in high school about computer science as an option for a degree, and I was basically told that it was a glorified math degree with no practical application. And so I kind of put that out of my mind and just kept working on programming stuff as sort of like a hobby. And then I applied to university under humanities. I was applying for a major in English and political science. And I actually thought that I was going to then go on to law school and hopefully work in international law. And during my first year of school, I was in first couple of months of my undergrad, I attended a guest lecture, and it was given by a computer science graduate at McGill. And she was actually working at a local game development company, and she talked about how her computer science degree helped with her current role and how she got there. And I suddenly realized that there were actual practical applications to computer science. So I had enrolled in an elective for computer science just to sort of like see what it was all about. And within about 6 months, I actually transferred my major over into computer science and still minored in poli-sci because I found it really fascinating. So fast forward 4 years, I am graduating with a degree in computer science. However, I think that I am going to go on to be a game developer. And it's not until I have some discussions with mentors who basically try and steer me away from that industry because it's very volatile that I decide, okay, maybe I won't go into game development. I'll just become a general software engineer. And I end up working at an agency doing mobile and web development. And I stayed there for 4 years. It actually wasn't until 2017 that I even sort of started thinking about security. At this point, I had joined Shopify, an e-commerce platform, and I found an online certificate program that I was hoping would kind of bolster my knowledge of cybersecurity because we really didn't have much exposure in undergrad. And at that same time, I decided to kind of ask around and see if anybody else had done the same program. And I found someone who happened to work at Shopify in my office in Toronto who had done the same Stanford program. And he really became a mentor and encouraged me to move laterally within the company into the application security team. So that's what I did. And then while I was working in application security, I actually went to a presentation from Lookout about a malware family that they were researching. And I suddenly realized that there was this opportunity to do work that combined my love for technical challenges and looking at code and reverse engineering and my interest in international relations and political science. So I actually attended a Day of Security event in 2018, and that led to me ending up at Lookout here. I met some people who acted as mentors again and encouraged me to apply for a role here. And now I'm going on 4 years here at Lookout, and I'm doing a job that I absolutely love that is perfect. So I'm mentioning this, again, not because it's like terribly thrilling to go through my whole life story here, but because it took a while and it took some trial and error with other areas of security. And I really enjoyed those areas, but they weren't perfect. They weren't perfect for the kind of role that I wanted and my passions. And so you're not alone if you're in that position too. I took a super scientific poll of people on Instagram that I'm in a community with. And I asked how many people transitioned into cybersecurity from either another industry or another area of tech. And about 500 people responded. And of the people who responded, 51% said they transitioned into cybersecurity. So that is actually a pretty staggering number. I think that's pretty unique for this industry. I don't think you necessarily see those numbers or those statistics somewhere else. And you know what this kind of shows us is that despite what we were led to believe in high school, most of us didn't know exactly where we wanted to end up or what we wanted to do when we graduated. And even those of us who knew we wanted to work with computers or have a role in the tech industry didn't necessarily end up in our ultimate roles until years or even sometimes decades after we graduated high school or university or college. And I know it can feel really overwhelming to consider this transition into a new industry or even a new subgenre of an industry you're already in. But again, one of the great things about getting into cybersecurity is that you're definitely not alone. And I think in large part, that's because cybersecurity, even though it's been around since the 70s, is really only getting to a point now where there's this new level of prioritization for businesses and organizations. Because, you know, for a long time, there weren't a ton of resources for those interested in cybersecurity or computer security, and there weren't as many options for learning about it in a structured academic environment. So in my undergraduate program, I had exactly one security class that wasn't even an undergraduate class. It was a master's level course, and it conflicted with all of my required courses, so I couldn't actually take it. And I think I only know one person who was able to actually fit it into their schedule. But now we have online learning, both paid and free courses, and we have extensive online resources that didn't exist in this capacity before. And we're seeing organizations really try and catch up after decades of, you know, mostly ignoring cybersecurity issues. So there are a lot of opportunities for employment. And this is largely because we're seeing this massive increase in demand for cybersecurity professionals and a workforce that is very, very slow to catch up. There is a massive workforce shortage in cybersecurity right now. If you look at some of these stats on the screen, they're quite staggering. And you know, why am I talking about this? Some of these stats you probably already know, but I'm really just sharing this as another reminder that this is a growing industry with a desire for motivated and enthusiastic talent. And it is okay if you're just arriving here, because so many of us had this exact same experience, but there are still a ton of opportunities. So now that we've talked about the reasons why it's okay to just be getting here or to still be finding exactly where you belong in this amazing industry, let's talk about how we can take measurable, actionable steps to actually explore these new opportunities, and why the experience you already have, even if it's from a completely different industry, doesn't represent any kind of waste of time or effort. So there are a bunch of different areas of cybersecurity to explore, and when I'm asked how somebody can get into the industry, my first recommendation is always understand what options are available. Now, industry roles have been broken down into two main teams, red or blue. Lately, extra colors have been added like purple or orange, and this is to sort of indicate this overlap in responsibilities between the different teams. But I'm really just going to restrict it to these two right here as kind of more of an example. But if you want to read more, there's a link here to Hacker Noon that has a really fun InfoSec color wheel that kind of talks about all the different team colors and what their responsibilities are. So red team first. Red teams are primarily offensive security teams. These are the people who are attacking infrastructure with pen testing or social engineering, and their whole goal is to find vulnerabilities. And then you have the blue team, and they tend to play defense. So these are people who are handling incident response or doing digital forensics, or my team, threat intelligence. And like I said, a lot of these roles do have overlap. That's why we're seeing this sort of like new color wheel come out. I know personally as a malware researcher, I've also had to build demos of malicious functionality to kind of just show as a proof of concept that it's possible. But if you have an idea of what roles are even available in this industry, then this is a really great starting point to really figure out what you might want to do, where to dive deeper into learning about those roles, and also to really figure out what you don't want to do. So, okay, so you've read through a list of all the different possible opportunities within this industry, and you've looked at red teams, you've looked at blue teams, you've looked at purple teams, you've looked at all these different possibilities for you to move within the industry. But what do you do next? So really, it comes down to narrowing down your list, because it's really hard to fully dive into 15 different areas, and a lot of them are probably not going to be a great fit for you. So one of the easiest ways to narrow down your list is actually looking at what responsibilities these jobs have. And you can do this with something as simple as a LinkedIn job search for, say, a pen tester or a web application security engineer, and see what those roles describe. And this is really helpful for crossing out areas of industry that you're not interested in. You can, ask yourself questions like, does this look exciting and interesting to me? Or would I enjoy the pressure or expectations that are set by this role? So for example, in some roles like incident response on the blue team side of things, you might be required to be on call. And this means you're available to handle issues that arise day or night for a set time on a schedule, typically that's recurring. And if you're someone who's really not a fan of high pressure environments and you can't see yourself functioning very well in that situation, then that might just not be a great fit. But on the flip side, if some of these descriptions look absolutely perfect and they look like something that you're really fascinated by, then that can really help you prioritize investigating further in those particular areas. And you might even recognize responsibilities that lead to a role that you didn't even know existed. So along with looking at, say, LinkedIn job postings or career postings on other various company websites, you can also do this through conference talks, like the day in the life talks that we've been doing at the Lookout booth. You could do that by listening to people talk about what they do on a daily basis, or even just going through and looking at articles and interviews by people who have the roles that you think might be a good fit for you. Okay, so you've read through the different options of roles that exist across various teams, offensive security, defensive security, a mixture of the two, and you've looked at some job descriptions, and now you think you know what you find the most interesting. So what do you do next? Now this is the fun part. This is when you get to test drive your options. And one of the best ways you can do this is by participating in something called Capture the Flag or CTF competitions. And these are available both online or in person at security conferences. And they're really fun. They're actually a collection of challenges that span multiple areas of the industry. So say network security or pen testing or social engineering or reverse engineering. And you solve different challenges based on these subgenres, and you get points for either yourself or your team if you're working in a team. And then you win prizes based on the points that have been collected. So these are really great because they give you a chance to really test out challenges and real responsibilities that you might have in these various roles throughout the different subgenres of cybersecurity. And it was actually at a CTF that I discovered that I loved reverse engineering, like absolutely fell in love with it, could sit and stare at a problem for 4 hours, and I think it was 15 minutes. So I probably wouldn't have known that, or at least it would have taken much longer if I hadn't participated in a CTF and actually done the reverse engineering challenge. So at the very end, I have a slide with a bunch of resources, both for online courses and different Capture the Flag online events, because yes, they're online, they're in person at conferences as well, but with things, this current climate, it might be harder to find an in-person event. So I'll show you those at the end. And then aside from CTFs, there are online courses, of course, free or paid, structured or self-directed. And these can really be a great way to introduce you to subject matter that you might not have been exposed to, and that might be associated with a role that you're interested in. Or if you find a particular topic mind-numbingly boring after watching a couple of courses on it, but understanding it and keeping up with the technological advances for that subject matter are part of the role that you're interested in pursuing, then maybe it's not the best fit because you find it mind-numbingly boring after all. And aside from online courses, books can be really helpful with this too. And again, less time commitment there usually if you're not going to be enrolled in a course, but you still learn some stuff, which is great. And then finally, side projects. So these might require some guidance from somebody like a mentor or a colleague as to what kinds of side projects will actually be relevant to the role you're interested in, but they can be really helpful not only for providing you with some kind of experience and learning about a new area of the industry and the subject matter that you might not actually have had experience with before, but even for providing a kind of portfolio for roles that you might be applying to, and having a little bit of side experience to talk to a hiring manager about. Okay, so you found what you want to do. What comes next? How do you get your foot in the door? I am a huge advocate of mentorship. It is how I ended up in application security, and then again, how I landed here at Lookout. And the cybersecurity industry is relatively small, and building relationships can really help from everything from discovering new open job positions to attending conferences, or even just learning about how somebody's day job works. And even how to prep for an interview. All of this can come from developing relationships and finding a mentor-mentee relationship. And most people are very willing to give their time and to help you get to a spot where you are excited and passionate about being in this industry, again, because they've likely been in that same position. I would hazard to guess that 99% of the people that you reach out to would be very accepting of a mentor role. And even though it can feel kind of intimidating cold calling somebody either through email or social media, most people have been in your shoes and they're more than willing to answer some questions or even direct you to resources that you might not have heard of or might not have had exposure to. And then one of the biggest challenges I think a lot of us talk about with transitioning into a new industry or even within an industry you're already in is finding a role with suitable expectations for your experience level. And one thing that I found, something that I feel incredibly lucky to have had the experience with, is being able to move laterally within an organization. And you can kind of overcome the challenge of trying to get your foot into the door of a new organization with a little bit less experience if within your current organization they have support for lateral movement. So if your team has some kind of security, or your organization has some sort of security team that has the kind of role that you're interested in, it's worth speaking to your manager or HR or whoever would be responsible for helping you transition into a new role within your own company. Because employee turnover is actually really expensive, and most companies would much rather just move somebody laterally within the organization, if they're a great employee that they don't want to lose, and especially for a role that's notoriously difficult to hire for, rather than losing them altogether. But if you're not in a position to do that, not everybody is, and you feel you need to bolster your resume for the roles you're most interested in, again, that's where we come back to self-directed side projects. I really feel they can be a great way to kind of build a portfolio to show to any potential employers or recruiters as well. And you're really demonstrating not only that you're starting to build skills for a role that you're interested in, but also that you're enthusiastic and motivated for the work that you're about to make this transition into. And as I mentioned before, this again might require some guidance, and that's where jumping back up to mentorship comes into play. But I found side projects incredibly helpful as I was transitioning from application security engineering into malware analysis. Now, finally, we're moving into a new industry and doing what feels like entirely different work. And I know it can feel as though you've wasted some time getting there. I've had those thoughts, I've had those concerns. But it's really important to remember that the skills you might consider unrelated, especially unrelated to a new role, are actually really valuable in ways you might not have realized. So many cybersecurity roles are not solely reliant on technical skills. And even most of the more technical roles that list, say, 5 or 6 technologies or languages that might be required for your daily work, just don't necessarily require you to have extensive experience in those areas. So foundational knowledge ends up becoming much more important than having this sort of very nuanced experience with a particular language or a particular tool. For example, let's say that you're applying for a role that says that you need to know Python to be able to do some scripting, but you've only ever worked with JavaScript. That isn't really a big deal. For most people hiring, they're going to look at the fact that you have some code experience, some experience writing code in a scripting language, and that will be applicable to your new role. That's totally okay. The more technical roles also, they do require some of these so-called soft skills, and I hate that term, but they're often called soft skills. And you've likely honed those skills in other industries and even, at other times in your career, and they might seem unrelated to what you're currently doing, but I promise you they will have some kind of application. Most of the people you speak to in this industry will have their own experiences, but if I look at my career trajectory, I have seen how my time in political science now helps me understand the geopolitical context for the research that I'm doing. And my history in web development really helps me understand some of the attacker infrastructure that I'm looking at. And then, all the essays I had to write as part of my initial English major and poli-sci major really make technical report writing much, much easier. So all of these areas might seem to most like they are completely unrelated to cybersecurity, but they now benefit me in my day-to-day work. So we're nearly out of time, and thank you so much for being here. This is such an exciting new adventure, and I hope that some of what we talked about today will give you ideas for finding your niche within this industry and help you get your foot in the door for a role that you absolutely love. I'm not sure how much time we have for questions. I'll try to answer some in the comments here, but if you don't feel comfortable asking these publicly, please feel free to reach out to me. I have my email address here as well as my Twitter handle, and I'd be more than happy to talk about my experience or maybe share some insight or things that might help you in yours. And then the next slide I'll show right now has all the resources, and I'll share these up on Twitter as well. But yeah, please do reach out if you have any questions and stop by our virtual expo booth because we have recruiters there and a lot of lookout people who are hanging around who could answer some of these questions as well. Thank you so much. Time. Yes, absolutely. Side projects for people getting into their first role of cybersecurity. So this is quite dependent on what sort of niche area you're interested in. Something like web application security, for example, there are some great there's sort of like paid bug bounties that you can do where you can sort of walk through showing how a vulnerability might exist in a web application, and even following along with a tutorial and making notes and kind of like showing how you followed the tutorial and some of the insights you gathered from doing this, even though they weren't your own kind of initial discoveries. That's still showing that you're kind of going through that process. For some areas like say malware research, that's a pretty easy one because there are a lot of open repositories where you can get malware samples, walk through a tutorial, basically reverse engineer the sample and write up your discoveries, or even the discoveries somebody else kind of led you to, but you can kind of, again, give your own comments on them. Those are some ideas for different projects you could do, but it really depends on your sort of niche area. And somebody in that area would probably be able to direct you towards a really great example of something that you could do. It's a great question. What are the basic skills you need for working on the red team? Oh, this is a great one. Persistence, patience. That's also really good. So my application security days, I would have to basically pen test Android applications, and it can take a very long time to actually find the vulnerabilities. But so persistence and patience. It's really helpful if you have an understanding of how software is built for the kind of software that you might be trying to attack. And then having good communication skills, because most of the time when you find vulnerabilities, you have to sit down with the engineering team and say, hey, we found this, sorry. And it can be really helpful if you've got the skills to communicate those findings, either verbally or written. It just makes the process much easier. Orange. Yeah, I hadn't heard about that either. It's some combination of yellow, which I think is more of like a software development role, combined with red. So that's sort of the case where you have somebody who is pen testing applications and then also responsible for fixing the vulnerabilities that are discovered, which is a very interesting combination. Do I need to know how to code for my role? So that's a great question. I I think it's incredibly helpful. I do have colleagues who came into this role without a prior technical experience or a prior technical role, and it's something that you can kind of pick up as you go. But I do feel like it makes life easier if you not necessarily have experience with large scale software projects, but let's say you can look at a script and understand what the script is doing, or you can kind of follow the trail of what's happening, say in an Android application, in our case, because we're mobile. That's really helpful. Again, those are things you can pick up while you're already on the job, and people have done it. But it is helpful to have that skill kind of in your back pocket. Thanks so much for attending. I don't know if we're out of time. But yeah, again, feel free to reach out over email. I'll hang around the expo booth as well and answer any questions that I can. Thank you all so much for attending. Bye.